Susan Sullivan is a professor of law and politics at Temple University in Philadelphia. Professor, thanks so much for your time. Just your first reaction to this.
Well, I had a couple of reactions. I'm somewhat shocked that initially that this opinion was leaked. This is unheard of. When there are oral arguments in a case, the judges come together, they talk about what they think they're going to rule. There are many drafts that go back and forth. This is one of them. So the language here is not necessarily the language that we will see in the final opinion. The language here from Justice Alito is very strict. It's very defiant. It's unequivocal. So it remains to be seen whether we will see that language. But I guess my initial response was, how did they see this? How did this get leaked? That has never happened in the history of the Supreme Court. My second reaction, of course, is just shock. This is something that we have been fearing but anticipating. So there are people who are looking at what the court has done, or will do, I should say, and what kind of response the government is going to be able to have in order to protect women who are seeking to terminate their pregnancies. And of course, there are things that can be done, but there's going to be a cavalcade of legislation now to try and reinstate some ability for women to have some opportunity to terminate their pregnancies if they choose to do so.
What will it mean for women if the court does go ahead and abolish Roe v. Wade in that judgment in 1973?
Well, the consequences for women are actually very straightforward. What we have right now is a constitutional right, a right to be able to choose what women do over their own bodies, similar to the right to free speech. State governments cannot legislate away your right to free speech because it is, the court has found it embedded in the Constitution. The right to terminate a pregnancy is not as clear, it's not as unequivocal. But if that right exists as it does now, then the state governments in each of the 50 states cannot make laws that will violate that. It is a constitutional right, it's protected. But what we will have now, if Roe versus Wade, the case that established that right, is thrown out, suddenly there won't be that protection. Suddenly the 50 states can each enact their own legislation. So we can have a 6-week ban, we can have a 15-week ban, we can have some of the 50 states allowing abortions. From a practical point of view, from many of the southern states, we anticipate probably more than half of them, so possibly 26 states, covering millions and millions of women. The access to abortion will not only not be available, but it will be punishable in many instances as a criminal penalty. The doctors who perform abortions can be punished. The Georgia law goes as far as to say if you facilitate an abortion, if you're the Uber driver, you are potentially, the Texas legislation. So for women, this means a massive swath of women, millions of women around the country being vulnerable to the state laws that will now outlaw abortion, and they do not have that protection, that this is an established right. That protection essentially eviscerates and disappears if the draft opinion that Justice Alito has written is in fact the opinion that we see. And it's interesting, we have a 6-3 court, 6 conservative justices who, including 3 who were recently appointed by Donald Trump, and of course one who, liberal judge appointed by President Biden. What's interesting is we anticipate, based on this draft, we're not going to have a 6-3 decision. We're going to only have 5 of the conservative justices. The other justice, Justice Roberts, looks as though we anticipate he is going to say, we don't overrule these precedents. They've been there for 50 years. They're ingrained in our Constitution. We don't get rid of them lightly. So it's going to be very interesting to see if he switches over to that group that would support the constitutional right of a woman's right to choose to terminate her pregnancy. And indeed,
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting breakdown, just as you're ending that answer. I wonder if, away from your academic expertise of the law and the politics of it all, you'd feel comfortable talking to us about the philosophical issue here. I mean, because this is about a woman's dignity, as you said, about a woman's right to choose what she does to her body. I mean, this is basically the patriarchy writ as large as possible. It's about men controlling women, isn't it?
Exactly, that is how it's seen by many people. There are a number of different philosophical tenets here that are being discussed. Absolutely, this is women going back hundreds of years to being treated as chattel, as property, as being subjected to the rules and regulations of men. There is, as your previous guest talked, there's also a religious component. There is a strong faction, although a minority of Americans, that are concerned that this is killing a child, killing a living person. When does life begin? Does life begin when a fetus is 3 months old, when a fetus becomes a baby that is born? So there are a number of different philosophical aspects here that come into play. But essentially, it is a right to choose. It's about choice. It's about freedom. It's about those values that are ingrained in the American psyche. So I think from a philosophical basis, that's the kernel of the issue that and the prism through which we analyze these philosophical questions.
Professor Susan Sullivan, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate your time.